that's what I thought I wanted it to be like to go around and like say goodbye to the places that I had loved, and so I put that thought process and that feeling into a thing that I was familiar with, which was a game.
Welcome to the Draw Your Dice podcast, the show that calls on the champions and new contenders of the tabletop RPG arena. My name is Jeremy Gage, and I am learning about tabletop game design and publishing. If you are a budding game designer or a veteran looking for fresh musings, stay tuned as we learn about the inspirations, processes, and philosophies of professionals in the industry. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you all listen here again. I'm still working out what a good intro is for this show, so I hope that you're having fun watching me flubber. Today, we have a really amazing guest. They used to be a co-host over on the Action Points podcast with lots of insightful articles, so please go check that out. He has just gotten done making a game every month for the last year and has absolutely destroyed that goal by going above 12, hailing all the way from Klang, Malaysia. I'd like to welcome today's guest, Aaron Lim.
Hello. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi.
I saw you go by Remy on the email. Do you prefer Jeremy or Remy?
Jeremy is super okay. It's a relic of the past I can't change. God damn it. Aaron, welcome to the show. For the people at home, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit as you present yourself to the world?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me here. So as you did such a good job introducing me, I used to run a podcast and I design games, tabletop games. I used to mainly design like card and board games. That was like one of the big things that I was into. I also used to help run a monthly regular playtesting event back when I lived in Melbourne. So we did a lot of playtesting of mainly card and board games as well. And in the last couple of years or so, I started getting back into RPGs. I used to play back in I started playing in like 2009 or something. And then everyone grows up and gets busy. Your group kind of disbands for a while. And then a few years ago, we started playing again. And then I got the itch to like start, making things. So I've been designing tabletop RPGs on Itch. Itch has been really helpful and useful as a platform and not so much. It's kind of tricky. Like, it's not so much the community features that I like, but I really like the game jam features on Itch. We can talk about that a little bit more later. But like I'm a huge fan of game jams and the structure that they give, which was one of the big things that helped me on this project that you mentioned. So this year I told myself that I would design a game a month, which is not. To me it's like, okay, yeah, it's quite a big thing, but also like I've seen I think Adriel Wallach did a game a week for a year. That's like 52 games, so it's like, oh yeah, okay. That's impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, 12 games over 12 months was also, I mean, I'm trying to be better at like not selling myself too short, but like, yeah, I think I did a pretty good job.
Yeah, there are quite a few games that I've kind of poked around and peeked at for today's talk that I'm really interested in diving in about that have been a part of your project. Stuff like I got the Homebound package that you were selling on Itch that has some really cool games in it. And we just had especially one of them is your lyric game that you created, the How to Say Goodbye.
Yeah.
And we just had a guest on here, Adira, who also kind of focuses on lyrical games. And I'm glad to have a kind of a back-to-back with that. Before we start diving into game speak and principles and all of that nitty-gritty, I like to remind people that everyone starts somewhere. What was you already talked about sort of your first kind of touch points with games, period, but what was the point that you first started wanting to design games? What brought you into wanting to play with and make your own games?
I guess that there's two answers to that question, depending whether you want to focus on like tabletop RPGs or games in general. Games in general, like I've wanted to like make games since like I was a kid. Probably the Pokemon trading card game was the first one that was like, oh yeah, I could do this. Like
Yes.
it's just making cards, right? Like it's just making new cards for a game system that already exists. Like I feel like a lot of people who started playing like Magic and Pokemon, like, and getting into like custom cards and stuff like that, it's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? Because that those games have a structure that is modular. Like you have like a base system, and then there's so many parts that you can design to fit within it, that it kind of like, I suspect it sparked a lot of people into like making games and designing games, just from like simple things and like making your own cards, and like, oh, how cool would it be to like convert this character from like a different show or something and make like a Yu-Gi-Oh card or a Magic card version of that character. How would you do that? That kind of, like back then, in when I was like a young child on the internet, it's like, oh yeah, I want to make Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as Magic cards. Totally. That kind of stuff, right? Like that I think that definitely was a thing that got me started on thinking of games as things that you could make, because it felt very achievable, right? Like making one card is not that difficult. And then you slowly realize that, oh, okay, if you make one card, it has to interact with other things, and then it interacts with the systems, and like, oh, can you change the systems? And like, I moved from playing Pokemon to playing Magic, and like Magic especially was quite a big eye-opener for me, because of like the different formats of play. When in Pokemon, I was like, okay, yeah, you play against one other person, you win prizes, whatever. And then learning that, like, oh, you can play drafts, you can play multiplayer, you can play, like, there's so many different ways to play Magic that the same underlying system could be adapted to. And that kind of like sparked something in me as well. And like saying, oh, okay, yeah, so, you can design parts for the game, and then you can design different ways to play the same game. And then from that kind of like led to like thinking about like game design in general. And I think one of the big kind of like beacons, and I still think like what he does is a great resource. Mark Rosewater and the Magic R&D team, I think they were pretty innovative in a way that they were very consistently and not fully transparently, of course, because they're still a company, but they talked about like design and development pretty regularly and openly on their website. Like they publish articles about designing Magic every week. Like there'd be a design article and a development article every week, and I used to just read all of them. And so having that kind of like insight into like, oh, this is what game designers think about and do was a huge like inspiration. And if we want to get to like tabletop RPGs specifically, like I mentioned, like I started playing in 2009 with like 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and one of the ways that I got into to 4th edition was through podcasts, because I actually tried to start playing D&D back in like 3rd edition. Couldn't find people. Like back then I hadn't thought to like use the internet to make friends, to like find people to play with. But like, so I only looked to like the people around me, right? And like I found one friend who was like willing and able to like help, like, like maybe one day we'll play. And like we daydream while reading the pirated PDF of D&D 3rd edition, because we were young and those books are expensive. They're so expensive. Like it's expensive for an American. Like it's way more expensive like in Malaysia when you take that into account, like the conversion into account. Like it's hundreds of ringgit.
Wow.
Anyways, that's a digression. So because I listened to podcasts, right, and I actually had and I listened to multiple podcasts. Like Wizards put out their own ones, and they did the collaboration like with Chris Perkins, and then they did the collaboration with Penny Arcade and with Robot Chicken. I almost said Rooster Teeth. They did that, and I listened to Critical Hit, which was another D&D 4th edition podcast, and there's a few others that I don't remember, because the one that I stuck to in the end was Critical Hit, and hearing how they hacked the game, and like, oh, the way that they play is different from what I would have read from the book. So one, it was good. It was a good way to learn how to play, but it also just straight up told me, oh, you don't have to follow the rules that are in the book. Just hack the stuff to like make it work how you want it to work. And so that was like also a thing. So started trying to make custom classes in fourth edition, like making up like special powers to give out to players, like special items, and like making sure that they worked within fourth edition's framework. And I didn't think of myself as designing a tabletop RPG back then, just because fourth edition felt so much like for good and bad. I love fourth edition, but like for good and bad, it felt a lot like a tactical war game or like a tactical skirmish game. In fact, the Dungeon Command series where they just like lost all pretense of it being the fourth edition combat system of it being an RPG, and just like, look, let's just clean up the combat system and make it a skirmish game. Like it was fun. So I still thought of that as like, oh, it's kind of like similar to board game design. So that's kind of like the first things that I did in tabletop RPGs. And I think that's where a lot of people start, right? Like hacking in new items, hacking in new powers or classes, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But the first like real full game that I wanted to make was probably like, I wanted to hack in. So this is funny because you mentioned Homebound, the zine mm-hmm. that I put together. Mm-hmm. So one of the games in there is Far From Home, and that started actually as just a way to like, I wanted to hack in a different option for losing stress in Blades in the Dark and downtime, because I wanted that to be a, like the idea of diaspora people like living within a different place, like immigrants, like the way that they would lose stress, like especially with I think the Skovlans are mm-hmm. And the Eruvians in the base Doskvol setting mm-hmm. are not from Doskvol. So mm-hmm. I wanted to have the option of like, hey, we blow off steam by like going to their Chinatown equivalent or like Koreatown mm-hmm. equivalent, and like hanging out and like eating the food that I miss from back home, that kind of thing. And I originally was just working on that being like, oh, it's just a small hack to downtime, which then morphed into like, oh, I want to make a game about this. And then I was like, I played Mask, and like, oh, that also like fired up like, oh, Mask is such a great, cool system of like seeing how it actually applies the underlying PBTA system in really interesting ways that doesn't follow, because I think back then I was playing a lot more Dungeon World, so like that still felt very similar to like D&D and like the typical fantasy. Oh, you have hit points, you have armor and stuff like that, and like the way Masks did things was like so different. And so then I wanted to make that into like, I wanted to make to combine those two ideas together and make that like a Mask style game using that stress release idea, and then that morphed into a different game entirely, into like it uses a no dice, no masters, belonging mm-hmm. outside belonging engine. So like that was the one that I wanted to make and was working on in like the background for a while. But the first game that I actually released on itch was actually the lyric game you mentioned. How to Say Goodbye was the first thing I published on itch, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the long answer to the short question.
Yeah. No, I love long answers, and I think everyone at home definitely benefits from long answers like that. It's really interesting that sort of your first touch point for games were trading card games. For me, I think that was also very similar. I started playing Magic the Gathering when Meriden had just came out as a set.
Yep.
Yeah. And
I started around then as well, actually.
Yeah, my older brother had just stopped playing with Scourge and Torment, which I think is the Planes Shift block. No one in Magic history quote me on that. That's probably not true. But it was sort of a hand-me-down from my older brother, like, yeah, here's this lava iguana that have like 4 cards. And I was like, oh, good. Okay, cool. And my mom at the time was getting me like Pokemon cards and Yu-Gi-Oh cards and stuff like that. God bless my mom. Mom, if you're listening, thank you for buying me all those pieces of cardboard that I would later throw into a fire because I didn't know what to do with them. Yeah, I was not an intelligent 13-year-old. But I think it's really fascinating that, because we've had quite a wide range of where people have started with games on this show. Most people have done like board games. Some people have also started with like D&D second edition or third edition. So I think it's really fascinating that one of your first touch points with games is trading card games. And I agree with you. I think the modularity of hacking away at those cards and being like, okay, what if this card had trample, first strike, and double strike? Oh, I see why that would be a problem for the game. Or, it starts to evolve from there and really expand in your mind of like what interacts with different cards. And then you start thinking about interacting with systems. And then when you get to the tabletop, you're really thinking about how everything intertwines with each other. And I think that's a really great way of experiencing or learning that sort of connective reasoning when designing a game. Well, let's start talking about some of those games, Aaron.
Yeah.
So I know you wanted to talk about Student Protectors of Malaysia for sure. And I also know that I really want to talk about your homebound games because there's such a different variety in there. But let's start with Student Protectors of Malaysia. So it's a powered by the Apocalypse game. But for the people at home, because you're going to do a way better job than I will, would you just give a brief introduction of what Student Protectors of Malaysia is about?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, it's a powered by the Apocalypse game about student superheroes trying to juggle their mundane responsibilities and obligations with being superheroes and like juggling those two. And the thing why I wanted to talk about it and why I put it on my there's a game jam going on now. I'm not sure when this is going to be released, so hopefully maybe that game jam is still running because it runs to the end of the year. It's the highlight jam. It's a really great idea of like just prompting people to submit games that they thought were their favorite or best ones from 2020, and I submitted Student Protectors to that because I think why I'm really excited to talk about that game is because like it came from it's like a lot of my games, like it came from like a really kind of shitposty idea to like just I want the stats to be like the subjects from the Sijil Pelajaran Malaysia, the SPM is the final exam for secondary school. I think that would be GCEs for Americans. Yeah, so it's kind of like that equivalent. Like you use that to like get into pre-university or university programs. And so I really wanted the stats to be the subjects in the SPM, and I made sure that like everything kind of like referenced the SPM. Like the phases are called student protector and marking phase, so they say SP and M. Like I get weird about like structural things like that often to I think to my own detriment. I'm trying to commit to the bit too hard when I probably shouldn't. but yeah, like that's the game. Like it's about being and the thing is I really like masks, but it tells a specific type of superhero story. And the one that I wanted to represent in SPM is actually the Janus, right? Like if you've played Masks before, the Janus is the one who has to try and juggle a mundane life with a superhero responsibilities. And I wanted a game that would just focus more on that because that's also a big theme in Malaysian or pretty generally in like student culture where you're like, yeah, I gotta go to school and do all this stuff and like think about like that's a pretty transitional liminal phase of like your life, right? Like you're trying to become an adult, like slowly becoming like getting to that threshold and like thinking what you want to do with your life, and you have all these obligations but you have all these dreams that you want to do as well. And I guess that's why those kind of superhero stories are really resonant because they tie into those anxieties as well of like, yeah, I have all this like potential and power, but like I also have these other obligations. So I wanted the game to kind of focus on that, and I think it does a pretty good job of it. Yeah. Again, a long answer to a short question.
No, not at all. Again, I love long answers. So I think it's really, when I was reading this, for me, my touchstone. So yeah, we have stuff like the SATs, the ACTs that help us get into university and stuff like that. I'm sure GC exists somewhere because I am not academically equipped to talk about every version of test we have in America. But what the feeling of this game, and I'm sort of an anime junkie, so my biggest touch points for this reminded me of like Fate Stay, Unlimited Blade Works, and sort of like the first arc of Bleach and stuff like that, where they were at school and they had to manage being at school, but they're Shinigami superheroes, so they gotta get out of there and do stuff, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses that are also transposed from their daily lives as well. The difference between Chad and Ichigo, and the difference between Orihime and Rukia and stuff like that. So I thought it was really awesome to read, and I like how this comes from a place of kind of putting the things you see as important or defining of Malaysian culture, or sort of that coming of age story, right? Because Masks is sort of a coming of age story, but like you said, it's a very specific coming of age story. This touches on a completely different culture and set of traditions that I think is really awesome in terms of a superhero game. So for me, and for the people at home, I think what I would like to know is, what is probably your favorite piece of design in this particular game? And then maybe also, what are you still kind of wrestling with? Because I see this as version 0.03, which means you don't consider it done by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
What are you still wrestling with, and what do you find really interesting about your game in particular?
Yeah, so I already mentioned my committing to the bit thing. Like I'm that guy who wants to like stick in the joke everywhere. So like I'll always have a soft spot for stuff like that. I can't not admit that. But in terms of like the actual like design decisions, I actually modeled the game after Monster of the Week. That was the other game that was a big touchstone for, in that there's a separation of phases. So you do the investigation phase, which is the student phase, and then you go to the protector phase when you go deal with the threat, and then there's the marking phase where it's basically like downtime in Forged in the Dark games. Because the core loop that I originally wanted to have is just that you have to gain this preparation in like investigating these threats to your town. And I also wanted it to be a very local game, like, right? Like I think the way I framed it is that like you care about your town, like your locality. It shouldn't be like, part of it is just the scale of things. Like your students, you're not meant to be dealing with like cosmic scale threats, right? So part of that is to like keep that flavor of like the power levels kind of like not that high, but also just to keep that sense of like, like you actually kind of have some connection to the town and the people living there, and so that's why you want to protect it. And then you go into so you then go to the protector phase when you go deal with the threat. So in the original version of the game, it didn't actually play into the obligations as much. There wasn't an obligation clock. There wasn't a danger rating. Like those were added in later after playtest, because the original core thing that I wanted the game to do was just like you get that preparation, you can spend it to, and then you have to choose whether you want to spend that preparation, the things that you've learned about the town, or like just the general experience and learning things throughout like being a superhero, like dealing with stuff to deal with the threat. Or you can take that preparation, save it up to the end of the phase, to the marking phase, and like, take that and like do well in your exams, and like so that was kind of like the core idea that I started with. And I think the obligation clocks and the way it ties in, so the way it ties into like the danger rating and the attention rating, that's the part that I'm pretty excited about, partly because it's new, and it's because of good feedback from the playtest, and that like, the players were like, hey, this feels like this should be more of a thing. Like this feels like the thing like what you mentioned, right? Like maybe not Bleach in particular because they were pretty laissez-faire about going to class.
Yeah, yeah. I agree.
But there's other I can't think of them off the top of my head, but whether there's a better fit because like My Hero Academia, they don't really go to class as well. But I'm sure
Class
there
is
are.
work.
Yeah.
Sailor
I'm sure
Moon,
there
maybe.
are. Maybe it's the magical girl shows. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the Sentai shows where they have
Yeah.
to go, and that's a huge influence from my early life as well. I love all the Power Rangers and Sentai stuff.
Yes.
So balancing between those two things, like so when I played, I did a playtest of that game with a few people, and they were like, yeah, that feels like it should be more of a tension rather than just like, because like I was playing it up as a fictional thing of that happening. I was like, hey, obviously, like you can't go around as students, like people will think you're cutting class or something, right? So the feedback was really good and led me to like focus on that. Yeah, I think that could be like a core identity of the game, of like how the game works, and like trying to balance those clocks. That should feel like what you're doing, like balancing clocks between like if you leave the threat alone and deal with your obligations, then the danger rating goes up. If you deal with the obligation, so if you focus on dealing with the threat, then your obligations come calling, and when you get forced to deal with your obligation, then the threat goes up. So I'm really keen to like get more playtests of that going to see how that system works in action, and and that's also kind of like the place where I see it needs more work in tuning, because I think that probably is going to be like a pretty fine thing to balance the feel of, and that's the part that I haven't actually like. I made that change like right after the playtest, and I haven't been able to playtest it yet, even though it feels like such a core component of the game now. So that's the thing that I'm like, oh, I'm most excited about. Like I'm really like happy and like keen to like get that going, but also the part that I'm worried about and I want to work more on, as in like that's definitely going to be like if and when I can get a playtest of that going again, I want to focus on that, because a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse moves are like I hacked them from like Mask or something. So like there's a baseline level of like, yeah, they work, right? Like there's there's a reference point there to like other people's work already that I can kind of like rely on. Whereas this structural thing, I'm more concerned about. Yeah. And also there's like a lot more guidance in like talking about making moves and stuff like that versus these kind of system changes. Although that's being talked about now more, like phased gameplay, like especially because of like Forged in the Dark, like people talking about the delineation between like downtime and like action phases. Like I think I was just reading Lancer as well, and Lancer also has that delineation. So like that's definitely something that's in the zeitgeist of like things people are like exploring. Like and I that there's a growing body of work and a growing body of analysis on those systems as well, which I think it's exciting and will help in the same way that like I feel more confident in like the moves not falling over because I can rely on like more advice and like look at what other people have done versus like this like phased system which more people are starting to work on now.
Yeah, you said a lot of interesting things there. One, I think what a good takeaway for sure is when you're creating sort of a fantasy-based game, or really I guess any game, but thinking about the scope of influence of the characters that players are inhabiting. Like you said, student protectors of Malaysia, they care about their town, right? You didn't want a game where they were going to go out and handle like eldritch gods and demons and everything like that. They're focused on what's happening in their town and protecting it.
Yeah.
Which I think for me as a beginning designer, like my first tabletop game was D&D 5e. And ever since then, I always fall into this like mental trap of like, how are my players going to scale from fighting bandits on the road to cosmic entities that are threatening to destroy the entire planet, right? And sometimes you can create a game about any one of those stages and stay within that biome and still have a very powerfully impactful environment and systems at your disposal. So I thought that was very interesting to hear. And it's also interesting to hear how you currently are working with one piece of mechanic that is relatively innovative and new and sort of like takes a lot of pieces from things, but you still fall back on some hacked elements that says, okay, the system is still working here and I can keep playing with my new toy, and when that breaks or is finished, then I can start looking to the more grounded pieces of design that have been tried and true, right? That have been made from other systems. So I think that stuff is really good. And the last thing that I think is really, really interesting is this talk about phased play. I know that for me, one of the things I disliked about my D&D 5e games, and I mostly run them, I think there's two phases that the game has that no one like the game doesn't talk about, and that is combat and not combat, right?
Yep.
Like everything that is not combat is wrapped around itself, and then combat is its huge like hour and a half of the session entity. And for me, I always felt that was a little unsatisfying because it feels like things like skill checks and everything like that the game doesn't really care about in a lot of ways. They're like basically skip buttons that you hit when you want to like skip the cutscene or skip the exploration, right? It's like, I want to search the room. Cool. Hit your perception button. Cool. You found everything you need to find, move on. And it's like the faster we can get to the encounter, the faster we can get to actually playing D&D 5th edition, right? So I really like that you noted that we're moving into a stage of design of talking about phased things like Forge in the Dark, like Monster of the Week, like even Aegon, the Paragon system that just came out a little bit recently. They even have sort of a phased system. I mean, same writer and creator, but that's to be expected. Yeah, I think all of that is really great information for people. And then, so I also want to talk about kind of touch on each of the Homebound games, because first of all, what I like about the marketing of it as a package feels really complete for me as a consumer. And I love that there are all this through line of theme when it comes to home and what it means to leave home, come home, and be on a journey, right? So the first game in that package is How to Say Goodbye, which is a lyric game. And I love sort of the poetry that's in it. I mean, you talk about it. You're the designer, right? So why don't you give a little brief walkthrough of what How to Say Goodbye is?
Yeah, it's retroactively a lyric game in the sense that like when I designed it, I didn't, lyric game hadn't been coined yet. The phrase, it's not like people had been designing those games, but that phrase hadn't been coined yet. So I didn't think of that game as a lyric game. But like I made that game back in 2018. I get into this. I talk about it a bit in Homebound itself. Just to give a bit of context, Homebound as a zine has a preface for each game that kind of like talks a little bit about its design and context. And the reason why I made Homebound as a whole was because I moved back from Melbourne to Malaysia back at the end of 2019, and I knew I was moving back from 2018. Like I had gotten married at the start of the year. My wife moved to Melbourne to do a master's degree for 2 years, and we knew that at the end of that, once she had completed her master's, there was like it's 80% that we would come back here. There was a possibility, like a small possibility that maybe if she decides to like stay, then we'll stay, but like most likely we would come back. So in 2018 I already knew I was moving back to Malaysia, and that game was made as kind of a way to process that, as well as like one of my friends was also moving away because of visa issue, like work visa issues. I actually gave him a copy of that game as like a goodbye present, and like it was a whole bunch of things, like, right, and it was made on one of the mornings of PAX Australia, which has always been like a big event for me personally, because it was the one time in a year where I got to see a lot of people who weren't in Melbourne, like, from Sydney or from Brisbane. Like I'm friends with like, people from out of state would come for PAX. Like, it's a big enough event that they would travel for it. And so that's one of the few times in a year that I would get to see them, because like they'd make the trip out to Melbourne for it. So, and then like always on the last day, like it's, bittersweet. Like, I'll see you next year, I guess. So all those things were kind of like weighing heavily. And because I knew this was like my second last PAX that I would get to see them easily. So all those kind of like things came together, and like I had been following like indie game design by that point. I was aware of like a bunch of like small games that had this kind of similar feel of trying to get a feeling or an emotion or a theme down into a game. And so I wanted to do the same thing for that. And that's where it came from, really. And I made it with the idea that like, wasn't really something that I wanted to play, but like it felt true. Like it felt right in that, like that was what I wanted. That's what I thought I wanted it to be like to go around and like say goodbye to the places that I had loved. And so I put that thought process and that feeling into a thing that I was familiar with, which was a game, right? Like I'm not like a painter or a writer or something, so like I make a game to process my feelings.
Wow. And
so that's where that came from. And then the rest of Homebound is also stuff that like you mentioned, like it deals with like home and going away. So like the other two games in there also have to do with home and travel. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's thanks for sharing that. Yeah, in Homebound, it does have a decent amount of design sort of notes before each game, which I think is really, really cool. If anyone wants to go out and get my man's Homebound package, you get some really great games with that and some really good insights as well.
And some context for that, right? Like I made Homebound, like I'm always torn about these games because, like I mentioned, I made How to Say Goodbye partly for a friend and gave them a version of that before they left. So it feels strange to like share it as a thing for other people because it feels personal. But I also I just tweeted it out. Like that's where the game came from. I just tweeted it out. And the rest of Homebound, like the whole package, the whole zine, which I actually made together with, I want to shout out my collaborators on the zine. V. Hendro did the layout. She's one part of the Story Brewers, and they do Good Society, and I think the Little Box RPGs were the last Kickstarter that did it. And like she does amazing like layout work, and I got to work with another artist, Cecile Richard, who did the cover, and she does, like they do amazing work as well. But I mean that whole project was put together as a going away present as well. So like before I left in 2019, so there's a version of Homebound which has more like personal photos and stuff in it, that I gave away to friends and people who were influential on me getting into like game design and doing game design work. So they got like the more personal version of the zine, and then I had a kind of like less personal version put up online. So that's the version that you can get. But again, I still am a little bit like, that's why I'm always a bit like, it feels strange to be like selling it as a thing. But I'm also proud of it, which is why I put it up and like, hey, I want other people to see this too, because I think we did. I mean, partly it's because V and Cecile did a great job as well, and I didn't want it to just be lost, right? Like, so, well, not lost. I mean, I gave it like the people that have it.
I think that I'm like slightly tearing up over here about how much these games speak from your personal life. I think it's a really amazing piece of art that you've been willing to share with others, and I think that's really cool. What I love that in its existence is that it helps codify, at least for How to Say Goodbye, it really codifies a feeling of like moving on, high school's coming to an end. We're all going to go our separate ways to college, right? We're going to have to leave our hometown and go somewhere else. And we've built up 18 years of memories together, or elementary school, or, leaving a job or something like that. Like, we've all had this feeling of bittersweet goodbyes. And this game codifies it in a very beautiful way, and can definitely be like, I imagine playing this game with like a sparked reunion of friends, and like we reminisce about different memories we had in college or at work or anything like that, and then when the weekend is over and we all have to go back to our daily lives, obviously we can't do that right now because COVID things, but I think that I think it could be really beautiful for, like, at least for me, for like getaway trips. You're all going to the cabin or something like that in the mountains, and you're just playing by a fireplace, and I don't know, it's just really beautiful for me.
Thanks. I'm too much of a coward to like play it.
Why is that?
I don't know. I feel like the game already is an emotionally vulnerable part of it, and I don't want to be more vulnerable than that. In that, like, I already know it's a game that I made, right? Like,
Right.
So that has some vulnerability built in. I was like, oh no, and then I have to be vulnerable in that game too. It's like, yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, I'm a pretty vulnerable guy myself. I feel like I'd cry the whole session. Well then, let's move on to the second game in the package, in the zine, which is Ithaca in the Cards, which is sort of this almost you say it's GM-less or GM-light in the text, but why don't you give a little walkthrough of Ithaca in the Cards?
Yeah, so I made this for Global Game Jam 2019 because the theme of that was like what home means to you. So I was like, oh God, like this is like I was already thinking of like putting something together for Homebound, and that was just like a lightning bolt to like I guess I have to make something about this. So it is a game about it's inspired by the Odyssey. Based on the name, Odysseus wants to return to Ithaca, and so it's about like travelers getting home from like finishing something, and then like, okay, it's time to go home, but like the journey back is still dangerous. And the coolest thing I think about it is that it's basically blackjack, right? And like I had like originally I wanted to make like cool systems about like traveling and like different encounters and stuff, and then I was trying to find like easy numbers for people to remember, and I believe it was my wife who was like, oh yeah, like if you hit 21 you bust, right? Like most people know that. And it's like, and I love this kind of like little hacks, brain hacks or whatever it is, of like cultural touchstones. It's like, yeah, if you're over 21 you bust. Like 13 is a bad number, 7 is a lucky number, that kind of thing, or 4 is an unlucky number for Chinese superstition, that kind of thing. Like I like playing too. And then so once I hit upon 21 being the number, I was like, oh, why not change the whole game to just be blackjack? So I designed as much as I can like a way for it to be blackjack. Yeah. Like, so people draw cards, and like you're comparing it against the dealer, the house, the dealer. That's why I call it GM Light. So because potentially you could just have one person play the dealer the whole time, or rotate dealers. Yeah.
Yeah, for it's almost like this. What I like about it is that even in the text you talk about how it's a game about potentially predetermined doomed characters. There's not a good chance that they're going to get home. There is a chance, but it's not a good chance. And I find that really fascinating. I'm really starting to like these games that sort of talk about friend of mine in the Brain Trust, Lino, is making sort of a space exploration game called. Hold on, it'll come to me. A Quiet Moment, that's what it's called. And the premise for their game is that you play explorers, you go on the map, there are these like whiteboard cards that you can draw on, you roll a d4 for energy, and you pick some actions. And basically, you're discovering the planet, and at the end of 3 cycles, or however long a tea light candle lasts, when that goes out, the sun explodes, like that star explodes, and your planet is destroyed. So the last part of the game is that you kind of talk about what does your character think about in their final moments before death takes them. And I think that this game fits in sort of that same emotional core a little bit of like the journey is way more than the destination sometimes. And yeah, I think games like this are a testament to creating around an emotional experience you want your players to have, and that your rules don't have to be 300 pages long, right? Like, I think, for me as a beginning designer, when I thought about making games, I was like, okay, the only games that exist are like Blades in the Dark, D&D 5e, what else do I have on my shelf? Iron Sworn, right? Like, all those games are like 150 pages plus of like strong content, and it's like, if you don't make that, you can't charge that $25 or whatever. But I think that they don't speak for how good, like, word count does not equate to quality all the time. And Ithaca in the Cards is, I think, 10 pages or so.
Oh, 10 pages, yeah.
Yeah, like 10 pages. It is a great game on 10 pages. And we had Adira Slattery on here last week, and she has a game called Chair, a lyric game, which is a single page that you could pick up, read, and you're done with the game, and it creates a very evocative emotional experience. So I guess for me, my takeaway for this game, and for I hope people at home, is that you can create games around just a feeling of exploration. Or if we had Adam Bell on here talking about No Stone Unturned, you can make a game about exploration and your impact on the environment. And you can make a game about a stripped down version of the Odyssey and experience that journey, even though you may not get home.
Yeah. There's something to be said about like dramatic irony. You know how it's gonna end, but you don't know how it's gonna get there, or you know how it's gonna get there, but like, and you still want to see it play out, right? Like that's like, sometimes when you watch like TV shows or movies, and you have that, it's like, yeah, this isn't gonna end well for anyone here, but I still want to see how they deal with it, yeah, not necessarily like, oh, how are they gonna get out of it this time? It's more like, oh, how does that affect the characters? So like the game, a single moment, was it that you mentioned?
A quiet moment.
A quiet moment, yeah. Like that also is like, you have a predetermined end, like the sun is gonna go out, the star is gonna go out, right? Like, so it's gonna end, but so you can build towards that. I think that's a powerful thing, in that it fires the imagination, because we've seen stuff like that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think having that box of emotional constraint or a predetermined ending constraint, I think Band of Blades also does that to some effect. As your goal is to get to Skydagger Keep, and you travel along the continent of Aldermark, and if you want to change that environment, sure, go ahead, but that game has a pre-scripted ending that determines victory for your team, and you play along with that idea in mind to see what happens along the way, right? Who do you lose?
Yeah.
Part of the game is like, who do you lose along the way? Who do you pick up? Who do you save? Who do you let go? Like, all these morality choices you're making determines these battle-hardened soldiers at the end of your journey. So, I
like you
love.
mentioned, the journey is more important than the destination for these sorts of games. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that journey, segue, leads us into Far From Home and kind of living in a new place, right? A place that is not home. So walk us through Far From Home a little bit.
Yeah, so Far From Home, like I mentioned, that was one of the games that I was working on for a while and like trying to get it out in some form because I wanted to be able to talk a little bit about the immigrant experience because I lived in Australia for close to 15 years and also back in Malaysia, like I'm a Chinese Malaysian with, my grandparents went from here, right? So it's something that is important to me in the sense that it happened, like I lived it, so I wanted to say something about it. But so it's a no dice no masters belonging outside belonging game, pretty standard in the end. Like it was a pretty standard adaptation, like hack of that system. I didn't actually do a lot of changes to it because I felt like it provided what I needed it to provide. I talked about like it coming from like Blade's downtime and then to masks, and then finally I was like, you know what, I think no dice no masters kind of like gets me where I need to get. And it is a game that I'm not confident about because I can only really represent like my personal like experience of being an immigrant, right? And there's so many different experiences. No two experiences are the same, and in the game I try to like allow space for like different interpretations, different experiences. But I am nervous about that, and I'm also kind of like nervous about like I'm not trying to like make a statement about like the immigrant experience or anything with the game. I just wanted to try and have to show kind of like this is what it might be like for some people. I actually did a talk about the game in this year's free play festival. That's online on YouTube. So I if you want to get into like more details about the game, I did a half an hour talk on it already. But yeah, like there's it tries to like talk about like the interactions between home and the hegemony, and like how, like I have conflicting feelings as well, right? Like I love Malaysia. I don't feel a strong connection to China. I love Melbourne as well, and there are things that I don't like about both places, and how people get treated both sides. And I wanted to kind of like say, like, not say, but I wanted to kind of like just put that into the framework of a game, of a system of like how these communities interact with each other, and how that process gets mediated. Because one of the things that really helped, I got someone to give feedback on the game, and they, like, one of the things that they mentioned was that the way, why are characters kind of like interacting with each other, because in Dream Apart, in Dream Askew, you're forming a new community, right? And so I originally thought, okay, yeah, like, like immigrants kind of like band together when they're in a different country, when they're in a hegemony. But that wasn't enough, right? Like that gave a fictional excuse to why you would interact, but like there was something missing. And like the thing that that feedback helped me arrive at is that a lot of the reasons why I'll take it personally, right? The reason that I went overseas was to study, and I wanted something out of it, which was, to get an education and a degree, and like, that opens pathways to work. But like Australia also got something out of me. Like the university got something out of me, right? They used they get money, right? They they get paid one.
Yeah.
But it's also like they get cultural cachet because look at all these multicultural, like people from all over the world want to come and study here because we have such good education standards or whatever, and like it kind of like it helps them, right? Like it's a two-way street. Like and the way immigration gets talked about, like, you know, you want the useful immigrants, you want the good ones, you want them to contribute to society. Like all the shitty ways that we categorize and put value on people in that way. And so that was the thing that clicked, in that, like, the circle, the thing that binds you together in this new place, extract something from you as well, right? And if you go there to study, like in the academy circle, then they get, you know, like if you go do a PhD somewhere else, they get your intellectual labor, right? And even in the sanctuary, like if you go there as for a humanitarian thing, they get control. they see where you are, and they know where you are, and like, yeah, it's fine as long as we know where you are, and you're not influencing our country's values and changing our values. Yeah, so that was a big kind of like moment of inspiration, I guess, that this is why you get people to read your stuff and give you feedback. That was like super helpful. And after that, I hesitate to say that game is finished as well. Like you see, like all my games I put up, I feel they are unfinished, and this is a struggle. I think if you speak with a lot of other creators, when, you know, there's like second editions that come out, right? Like Apocalypse World has 2 editions, Worldwide Wrestling just got a new edition, Monster Hearts has Monster Hearts 2. You know, as a designer, you never finish a game. Like someone said, you don't finish something, you just abandon it. And, like, you know, it has to be done because I gotta move on to other things, or I had to meet a deadline, the publisher needs something to publish. Abandon is probably too strong, but like you just have to like know that, like, you can keep working on it and like improving, and like later on, once you've improved, you can come back and revisit it as a second edition and stuff like that. So I'm struggling with that as well, like trying to figure out when games are done. And I think Far From Home is something that, like, I definitely don't feel confident in saying it's done, because I also got other feedback. Like, other people have read it and like gave me really good feedback about how it doesn't talk about other aspects of the experience, and especially like gender and stuff like that. So I will plan to continue working on it. And there was also really good insights on like how, because I made this a pretty straightforward hack of no dice, no masters, and belonging outside belonging, seeing other people work on like and see how they write moves for that system has also like inspired me to, okay, yeah, I there's different ways to do this, and like there's a reason why these things are written the way they are, and why they work specifically for Dream Askew and for Dream Apart, which I didn't think about when porting over the similar moves to this game. Yeah.
Wow. I'm kind of blown away right now. When we had Adam, 2 things before I get into the personal bits, but we talked with Adam Bell about sometimes you make a game saying something, and I think this game definitely says a lot about your personal experiences going from multiple places and having multiple heritages being a part of you. And we also talked with Spencer Campbell about, you know, feeling like your game is done. We had a conversation about like, he made a game called Slayers, which is kind of a codifier for Monster Hunter. And he said, you know, there's some things about the game that I don't particularly love that I wrote, and there's some things that I do love. And we talked about what a second edition looks like. And I think this doubles down on both of those things, that your games typically say something when you make them, or they have the ability to, whether sometimes you mean it or not. And then also talk about that as a designer, as an artist, as a creator, sometimes you are in a state of constant improvement, and you look back at past games like, that's not quite finished. But for me, for Far From Home, being a Black American, it hits me the way you talk about it hits me in a soft spot for sure. We just currently had an upswell of the Black Lives Matter movement down here in America. And I've seen it, we've seen it all over the world about people who don't want to stand for the prejudices based on the look of a person and making assumptions about their stereotypes. And there is something to be said about that feeling of belonging in a place and finding an environment that feels like home in a strange place. I've always lived in America. I've never lived in another country or anything like that. But for me, in where I live in Cleveland, there's definitely some disparities that people have about different areas. Places are run down and dilapidated and are not cared about and are villainized because mainly Black people live there. But I think that, one, it is a product of abandonment by people who view Black people as lazy or criminal, predatory. And that's not true. There are beautiful people there who are banding together to survive against all odds against those who are in control of their success, really. Like, some of the higher paying jobs in here are owned and run by white people, and when they look at a Black person, they make assumptions of them. And like you said, there are universities out here, we have scholarships for, like, if you're Black, you get a free $2,000 to attend here, but we also get to say we had Black people at our college, or we only look for Black people who have 4.0s from their high schools. And it's like, what a crazy experience to be someone from outside of a place, to only be brought in as a token trophy for exposure. So I think that Far From Home, while you say that you know that it doesn't touch every experience that might sit at the table playing this game, and while it may not be complete, I think, again, it's one of these games that codifies an emotion that isn't easily talked about in the open for fear of judgment or for fear of backlash. And finding people who can communicate with you in your own personal language, I guess, is sort of what I'm trying to touch base with. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I hope that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. This is a podcast, so I hope people are understanding what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, like, and this is the thing, right? Like, I have a position of, like, immense privilege. Like Chinese Malaysians in Malaysia are pretty privileged in a lot of ways, and, like, I could afford to go overseas to Australia to study because my parents could afford to send me there, right? Like, it's a very different experience to the experience of like the Indian community or the Orang Asli community in Malaysia, or like indigenous people in Australia, when it's like it's your own fucking place, and like sorry for swearing.
No, you're fine. Swear away.
and like someone else like controls this place.
Yeah.
So that's why I always think of like Far From Home is a thing that came from my experience, and it's a way of for me to kind of like work through my feelings and thoughts about these things in the language that I understand, which is games, right? And I want to be careful about what I'm saying when I put it in games, because like when you're talking about like systems and stuff, it's quite easy to like accidentally say something you don't mean to. Like it's a tricky medium, because you are letting other people bring play into it. Like I could have, if I was a better writer, I would have tried to process this by writing an article. If I was a better, if I was a musician, I would try to write songs about this. But like I the only thing I know how to do is make games. So I made a game about it, right? And that's why I've been struggling with this game, in that like I know it's not complete. I know it's not fully what I need. It needs to be as a thing, but it's what I needed it to be at that point in time, as a way for me to express what I thought about these things, and like put it in a language that I understood and could speak. That I guess that's the more important part. It's a language that I am able to wield. And this is because one of the things that I'm very aware of is that like a lot of attention that gets paid to like games like this is like, oh, they become kind of like empathy tourism.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And I struggled with like trying to like get this game together, because I was like, that was something I was aware of, and was kind of afraid of, and then finally like someone told me like, look, just putting into those words, it's like, you know how to make the game, right? And if it's wrong, if people use it the wrong way, or it doesn't say the thing you want it to say, then you change it. Right, like you are in control of it. Like you can make a second edition, you can print a retraction. Like if and this is the thing about making games. It's not just about you getting better as a designer. Sometimes you reserve the right to change your mind about how you how you thought of and felt about a thing. Right, like this is why you get rid of race in D&D, because like, oh yeah, like there's a lot of like weird race science shit that like this plays into, that we think that, you know, it's not even about like being a better game designer. It's just like, yeah, I learned more and changed as a human being, and I don't want that in the game anymore.
Yes, yeah. I love that. I love every word that just came out of your mouth. I mean, I've loved every word that's come out of your mouth so far, but I really think that hits the nail on the head, is that you have the right, you have the ability to go back and be like, you know what? I had a really interesting year, and I think that, you know, D&D 5e has some things that I don't love about it, so I'm going to change it. I'm going to say, you know what? We don't need this stuff. We don't need this lore. We don't need this setting junk. We don't need to codify races with
dwarves are tall
stats.
now.
Yeah, like fuck it. Like it's what's going to happen, because that makes for a more approachable and accessible and diverse style of play. Right, it's speaking in the vacuum of D&D 5e. So to hold the right as a designer to go back and, you know, say, you know what, I'm a better person, or I believe that I'm a better person now than I was before when I made this game 5 years ago. I think that it needs a change. I think there needs to be something different, it says, right? So I think that's a really good thing for listeners to have in their toolkit, is always the ability to go back and say, I know different now, and I think that I can make a better version of this same game, and I think there will be people who appreciate that. So, and that, you know, that affects the change you want to see in the world as a designer as well. You know, games also help influence ideas, just as music or art pieces do. So. The next segment I have here is our design trends. So in this segment, it's sort of like a partial lightning round thing, but in your sphere of influence or from your personal beliefs, what are some trends that you like that you're seeing in the design community? What are some trends that you maybe don't like that you're seeing? What are some things that you want to see, or some things that you would like to see go away as a design trend? You don't have to answer all of those, but just some like touch points of what you're interested in as far as design trends.
Yeah, I think we already covered this kind of like in talking about phased play.
Phases, yeah.
Like that's a thing that I'm paying attention to partly because like I made a couple of games and I want to look at someone else's test sheets, you know. I want to copy their answers instead of working on my own stuff. Like someone else like design it so that I don't have to like don't like but yes, like that's something that I'm excited about, like that idea of like, yeah, let's move between phases, and let's clearly delineate things that you can do in a phase. Like I think it's not just about phases, right? It's about the concept that like downtime actions from Forge in the Dark. Why I'm excited about them is because they make very clear operational. They put very clear operational things to things that structures. Sorry, they put very clear operational structures to things that previously had just been like, oh, the GM will work something out, right? Like no. If you want to create a thing, here's how you do it. Here's how your long-term project works. Here's how you clear your stress, and it ties into like the core systems of the game, right? And there are clear actions that you can do. There's rules that support it, but also there's flexibility for you to like I play in a regular Beam Saber game, and like my favorite like games are the downtime games, right? Like I know some people play, they get through a mission and a downtime in a single session, but we don't. We split our downtime and our missions to like separate sessions, partly because we don't. Because we don't have time, and that I'm playing on a time zone difference. So like we play only like 2 hours, 3 hours at most. So partly is a time constraint. You know, after the half an hour of like catching up, you know, you don't have that much time to like get through everything that you want to get through. Because of the time difference, I'm playing with people in Australia, so like it gets really late for them, and I always feel bad that like I keep my players late. But it also like I really look forward to like the downtime things, because like there's a clear mechanical part that you interact with, and then you build all the narrative around it, which is actually kind of like how combat works in a lot of other systems, right? There are very clear mechanical things that you do that get a very clear outcome, and then you role play with the outcomes. But it gives you that like systemic thing to do with non-combat things. Like I feel that like missions in Blades and in like Beam Saber and stuff like that, it's like they feel a lot more. They feel like less like combat than downtime does, in a weird way. In that like, yeah. In that,
in
like,
an operational sense.
Yeah. Because like, okay, this is the action that you take, and then there's an outcome, and then we role play through the steps that we got to that outcome. The best, like my favorite move in a Forge in the Dark game is the cut loose from Beam Saber, because it ties in two things. One is like reducing stress, and also building relationships between your characters within that one move. So it's always a really good like character moment. So like you get, and because it's a thing, like you always have stress to clear. 100%. Like you gotta have stress to clear, and so you always want to take the cut loose action, and because the cut loose action always comes with a new belief, like, and so it encourages you to like play out the interactions and like relationships between the characters in a like, you know, the system encourages that to happen, and like puts a mechanical focus on it, and so it's really cool when that happens. Like we always have cut loose, and I always love cut loose happening, because it just means let's put these two characters into a situation where they're trying to like relax or like make each other feel better, and then they interact and like learn something about each other. So I want to see more of those types of things, rather. So it's not just about phased play, but about rethinking how some of those actions within those phases could be, right? And I think Iron Swan does something. It's been a while since I read Iron Swan, but I think Iron Swan does. I might be thinking of a different game.
Sort of. It has, for a lot of its adventure and relationship moves, it does give way to having scenes around when you use those moves, like taking a journey, talking about what happens at each milestone, and then combat is sort of its exactly. And you can use the milestone system as, and you know, it's just a track, which is like a clock in Blades in the Dark for anyone that's not played either of the other game, but it's basically you work towards a goal, and at each milestone point, you can talk about, like, you know, you're halfway through your track, And you can talk about being halfway through the journey. Like you could be like, oh, it's been so long. I'm so tired already. And we still have so far to go. We're still searching for this thing. And you can come to the last box of your track and be like, okay, I can see the cave from here. Like all those little abstract things give you the sort of prompts necessary to access the role play, right? That I think that's where Ironsworn has its strength, is its combination of what does the move say you're doing and where do you stand on the current section of the track? How does that play into feeling completed about what you're doing? I think that, yeah, I love phased play. I think phased play is important going forward, especially for creating games that are more approachable for people. Like D&D 5e is a huge game that plays, like you talk about how in combat the system has you play around the result or the outcome of the system, and sometimes I think that D&D 5e doesn't give you any prompt for what's happening. All the heavy lifting of roleplay strictly comes from the players. It doesn't come from the game. The game just tells you how well you did or did not do at something that you were attempting to do, and then you as the player have to sort of drag out the roleplay from that result, right? Got a natural 20. Okay, whatever I was doing is a good thing, but it doesn't give you any boxes to work within. And I'm a strict believer that when you create a box for a box of limitations, you create the spark of creativity from those, because you're trying to just use that single resource to extrapolate an experience or an idea, which is why I like things like moves or having delineated actions like in Blades in the Dark does, or Powered by the Apocalypse or Masks or whatever. So yeah, I agree. I think there's something really important to be said about phases in games and having, it's almost like getting more bang for your buck too. Like you're getting, in Blades in the Dark, you're getting two games. You're getting a micro game in the scores, systems, stress, actions, whatever have you. And then you're getting another game in the macro of manipulating factions, long-term projects, having role-play scenes about getting rid of your stress. And like you said, in Bean Saber, Cut Loose is just a push on how much can we fit inside of one move, right? Not only are you getting rid of stress, but you're also establishing a new belief and having a scene with someone, which helps to put more continuity into the narrative as well through a single move. And then you get another move after that. So like, I think there's this talk about phases, having separate minigame systems, and packing those moves or actions or skills or whatever have you with maybe like 2 or 3 benefits, right?
Yeah, and like clear mechanical benefits that players want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I got a shout out like Friends at the Table's Partisan game for like showing me what downtime could be, because I realized that we couldn't fit when I realized we couldn't fit like mission and downtime within a single session most times. Like that was a really great example of how like you can build out like downtime to not just be picking action to do, right? Like, and encouraging like characters like role play through downtime together was a really good waypoint to like, you know, oh okay, that's how you could do it, because yeah, they did really cool downtime only episodes of the podcast. I don't want to touch on one thing. It's not so much that I don't like it, but I would like games to look worse. Partly selfishly because like I don't have layout skills, so all my games are just like I just do them in Word with image on top, and like yeah, they look bad, and I know they should be like more usable and stuff, and I'm working on that. But if people would be not as good as layout and like make worse looking games, that would be great for me. There'll be less pressure for one. There'll be less work for me to do, but. Behind that shitpost, there's a thing to be said about like I do kind of miss the idea of like just like getting a game that is just a Reddit post, you know, like like there's a product productization of games now that like, oh, it has to have nice layout, it has to have nice design, like it has to look good. And yes, like it's good for the players because like there's more thought being put into like user experience and accessibility. So I'm fully behind all of that. But also on the other hand, there's a small part of me that's like, yeah, I miss when games could just look like a Word document, right? I have games saved from like old, like, you know, the yeah, like there's a game that's just a Reddit post that I've saved. I have no idea whether the person who made it like went on to like put it somewhere else and change the name, and that's why I can't find it. But like I just have an image, like a screenshot of a Reddit post. It's like, yeah, I want to play that game one day. And like that kind of like lo-fi aesthetic I want to come back. And I think some people, especially in the lyric game community, do have that kind of like lo-fi aesthetic. But like I like to see more. You know, there's the meme going around of like, oh, I want to see shorter games made by less people, paid more and look worse. I kind of want that. Yeah.
Yeah, as much as I laughed, I do think there's this misconception, and I have been guilty of this myself, that every other page needs to have amazing art on it, and the whole layout design, it has like splash pieces in the corners, and like there's this fade out behind it, and like, you know, a lot of people's first touch point of games currently, at least for what I think my generation of game designer is, which is I've only been interested in game design in the last 3 years, so I guess it's not, you know, my experience doesn't matter. What I think is important.
No, it really doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a misconception about a pretty book is a successful book. And I think that we need to start looking past those things. I mean, not look past them. I think there's something to be said about beautiful art on products, but that is not the piece that makes the game. What makes the game is the hard work that went into figuring out gameplay loops, play testing, and all that stuff.
Yeah. And it is the thing, right? Like, I agree with that, and I also don't, in the sense that, like, I recognize that the graphic design is game design, right? Like, in a medium where basically you're just reading words on a page, how the words are laid out, how they are structured, that is designing the game. Which is why I wanted to caveat that this isn't like me railing against like
sure,
graphic design or whatever. It's just I kind of want both to exist, right? I want like so-called shitty looking games to also like exist, and a lot of times like they do, like their minimalist aesthetic is a design choice, right? It is a thought out choice to like have a game look the way it does, and I really do believe that like it's for the better, like that more people think about how the graphic design of the game works. But at the same time, like I'm bad at it, so like that's hence the joke of like, yeah, can you please like make your games look worse so that mine don't look so bad in comparison.
Aaron, your games do not look bad. I have loved the design of all of your games, and I am worse than you, so you are better than me, right? It's all a comparison relative thing. No, I'm serious. Listen, I currently am just like working in Notion trying to make a game and just put words to the page first, and now I'm like trying to figure out Affinity Publisher.
Release a game in Notion, come on. Like just give people access to like the Notion thing. It's like, yeah.
We'll have to have a separate conversation about that because I've been thinking something to that effect for sure. Is there anything, Aaron, that you are looking forward to making? This is sort of like the future section of the podcast. And is there either, I know you kind of touched on, you don't feel like you have much of anything to plug at this exact point in time, but is there a con or a jam or a game that's like rolling around in your head that you haven't gotten to paper yet that you want to talk about?
Well, I guess I'll give a shout out to Session 0. I'll be doing a demo of Ithaca in the cards and also Dungeon Whatever at that. It's an online con coming up in January. I think it's January 30th. And it's going to feature a lot of great designers from the Southeast Asia region. And yeah, and they're using Gather Town. I think it's like a virtual space thing that looks pretty cool. Like it's so it's not just like a Discord server, which like a lot of cons have had to use the last year, which is fine. It's great, but like I'm kind of like excited to see what they do with that con. So yeah, if you want to check out those games, sign up for that con, and I'll be demoing then. In terms of like stuff that I'm working on, I don't like, yeah, I just finished all of that. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really want to think about like design for a while. But I also had a thought, because I'm also preparing for Session 0 to run a demo game. And I was like, oh, what kind of demo scenario should I run? And there's a thing that I've been doing for my friends, which is I've been basically running PUBG games as fantasy maps, right? Like converting PUBG's Erangel and Miramar maps into like maps for like our games. Like we basically played PUBG, fantasy PUBG. Like you go around, there's like a circle that draws in, that's just like, it's just like a clock that ticks down, and like the circle is closing in, and like the circle is actually like some magical disturbance, and like you go around like loot and like, there's no role, I mean there's some role play, but like it's just loot. You just go around and like loot stuff and like try and like, and then you get dropped in with like other mercenaries and you have to fight them for loot and stuff like that. So it's basically fantasy PUBG that I've been doing for my friends for like a couple of games. And like I'm thinking of, because I'm probably going to run that as the demo as well. So I'm thinking of kind of like prettying them up and putting them together as a thing that you can get on itch, just so if you want to run a scenario that is fantasy PUBG, you can. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. It's pretty fun. Like it's a really good concept for like if you want just like a loot and slash way like session, like no drama, nothing. It's just like let's just grab some stuff. It's a pretty good like concept.
First of all, I love the thought of translating a very modern touchstone into a tabletop game. I think there is certainly this explosion of intellectual properties being turned into games. I know that there is a Hyperlight Drifter RPG being worked on.
Yeah.
Sort of I love it. I fucking love everything that Andreas has done for that game. But also stuff like Marvel tabletop games that are sort of using their own systems. I'm currently working on like a Devil May Cry, trying to get a hack and slash to feel like a game.
Yeah. I saw bits of that on the Brave Trust server. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. But I think there's this really cool notion of concept where it's the same thing as like in novel writing. Like I used to want to be a novel writer for a while, and you weren't a novel writer if you didn't read the classics. It's sort of like the elitist purview of it.
Yeah, the canon and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that in all forms of creation, all forms of design, for America, speaking strictly to that vacuum, we're looking at the loss of the table when it comes to tabletop, right? So a lot of my guests have been talking about creating digitally focused games using virtual tabletops, using Discord. The co-hosts of the Brain Trust podcast, Will and Adam, had created a game called Open World RPG, where it's literally just a road trip you take using the Google Maps function on like a browser.
Very cool. Yeah.
And it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely insane how creative that is to me, and how that creates a pop culture reference for people to use when they're playing games. Like you talked about earlier, how using those cultural baggage points of like 21 and you bust, 13 is an unlucky number, 7 is a lucky number, like using current touchstones that sort of touch base with a lot of people, PUBG, Discord, having a road trip on Google Maps. Like I'm sure people have thought about that stuff, just haven't executed it as a game. And now people are creating those games. And I think that it appeals to a much, I don't want to say wider audience, a more current audience. I think what those games create is getting outside the bounds of the elitist gatekeepers of like old D&D, right? Like people who are like, I don't want peanut butter in my chocolate. Stop mixing D&D 5e with all this. You know, there's been a big controversy around the creation of homebrewed wheelchair mechanics, and a lot of people were against its inception and saying like it's not necessary for the game. Why would my fantasy hero want to be in a wheelchair? And it's not about that. It's about creating a more accessible, approachable game that tells a wider range of stories. And I think putting those modern aspects into games today is powerful, I guess, is what I'm ultimately saying, is that I think there's now a separation of culture for video games that have way different touch points than people of older generations may like, and I think that's a good thing. At least in my opinion.
I think that there's definitely a lot of like crossover between like video game and like RPG people. Like recently there was the BioWare revealed that they had made a Blades in the Dark hack. Omni Blades in the Dark. Yeah. Some people in BioWare had been working on their own internally, had been making their own Blades in the Dark hack, and they played a game of it on YouTube or Twitch. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
that was that Mass Effect game, right? The Mass Effect universe one. Yeah.
Yeah. And like the fact that they used Blades in the Dark was I think is like really interesting, because like a lot of where previously a lot of that crossover potential felt limited to D&D just because of D&D's like cultural gravity, that people are branching out more to like different systems, different spaces. Yeah.
I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy for game design, at least, you know, in my amateur opinion.
Very least, it's new things to steal from.
Yes, exactly. Yes, new things to steal from. That's what I want to see as a trend. I want to see more new things stolen from. Stop making D&D homebrew hacks. Start doing other things, or make a D&D homebrew hack that's not D&D. So for this last little bit, Aaron, I'm going to pull up my rollable table and I am going to roll a dice, which I should have had out already. But this is like my secondary lightning round ditty where I'm going to put this right next to the mic for the ASMR experience. Cool. And I'm just going to roll randomly. This is probably going to be a prompt that we may not have talked about today that might be more business related or something like that. So, boop. All right. Aaron, using the prompt of publishing, do you have a tip for the listeners out there? And it can be to any touch point of your experience with that subject. It doesn't have to be like you have to be a master of publishing to answer this question. It's just, in your experience, what have you done with publishing of your games? What have you done for preparing for it, things like Kickstarter or putting them out on itch or graphic design stuff, I think is all important to that, right? What do you think that prompt, what tip can you give using the prompt of publishing?
Make zines, I think, and make shitty zines to that. I think one of the things that Zine Quest has shown is that, like, it's a little bit. I'm not super happy about, like, some of the effects of Zine Quest, where, like, people think zines are like a heavily produced thing now. Like we like this kind of like ties into like my previous thing about making your games make games that look worse. Is that I think people. They can get like daunted by like, oh, like Zine Quest is a big thing on like Kickstarter, and like zines have to have a print run of like 100 zines or something like that, and like it has to have nice graphic design with nice art, when a lot of the zine maker ethos is just like staple some pieces of paper together and like handwrite some things. And like I think learning how to make a zine will kind of like will let you see like how much of that process is kind of like really actually pretty accessible. Like, you just need a long arm stapler and a printer, and like you're good to go, right? And like making homebound was like really eye-opening for me, and like, oh, I can just kind of like make a zine for myself, you know, right? Like I made that with the audience of like 20-30 people that I wanted to give it to, and then the rest of it is just like, yeah, I'll just put it online. And if like and if you want the higher reach, then you can go through itch and stuff like that. But like I think go through the process of making a zine, work with a layout artist and something, or a layout designer and an artist. Like just make something. It doesn't have and make two, like give it to like make a game and a zine for just your game group, right? Like if you have a regular group, like make something that like collects all your homebrew stuff together that you've cobbled together the whole time with this group, and publish it as the zine for this group, and you say, hey, this is what you all made together, and it can be as nice looking or as shitty looking as you like. Yeah, because I don't have like professional publishing experience, but I think people should make stuff and not feel daunted about having all the right skills or tools to make it look professional. Like, just make stuff that you want to see in the way you want to see it. Yeah.
Wow. I think you and me align on those thoughts for sure, of just make something, and you can make something small, like I kind of touched on earlier. You don't have to make a 150 page game. You can make a 10-page zine and still be successful, and it doesn't even have to be heavily graphic designed or have amazing photography or whatever have you, right? It can be on a Word document overlaid with some pictures. Some clip art even. That's really good. That's a really good tip, Aaron. Aaron, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Little outro plug. Where can people find you? Where can they talk to you? Where should they find your stuff?
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, Jeremy. Sorry for going long, but like
I love long.
I think it's because I haven't been able to talk to a lot of people, so it's nice to talk. So yeah, you can find my stuff on Aaron Lime, EHRONLIME.itch.io, and I'm on Twitter under that handle as well, at Aaron Lime, EHRONLIME. If you want to remember that, it's just my name, Aaron Lim, spelled wrong.
Heard.
I know people have asked me and like, what is that? Is that Aaron Lime? It's like, no, it's just my name spelled wrong. I'm sorry.
I just being a goofy shit poster. That's all. Great. All those links will be in the description below, everyone. Again, Aaron, thank you so much. And for everyone listening out there today, thank you for joining us. I hope you learned a lot, because I know I certainly did. Goodbye, everyone. Say bye to the people, Aaron.
Bye to the people.
All right, that's a wrap. I am very appreciative of the perspective that Aaron gave us with his experiences around the world and distilling those into these games. Aaron, continue to stay true to who you are. You will go far. All the games we talked about today, along with all the links to get in touch with Aaron, will be down below in the show notes for your access. If you liked the show and found it helpful, please send a tip my way over on Ko-fi, or if you are unable to donate, please consider sharing this with the person you thought of while listening to this episode and leave a review. Both of those methods greatly impact the success of this show and lets me know that what I'm doing is beneficial to designers out there. If you finally got your game off the ground and out in the world, you can tag me at JeremyGage5 over on Twitter with the hashtag #IDidIt. That's IDYDIT. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you next time.